would now like to introduce Ms. Wendy Kerry, who will be bringing greetings to us on behalf of our platinum sponsor, Massy. Wendy is the Senior Vice President, Corporate Governance and Corporate Secretary at Massy Holdings Ltd. Wendy.
Good afternoon to everyone, all protocols observed. It is my pleasure to deliver on behalf of the Massy Group a few remarks this afternoon. Massy is a proud sponsor of Corporate Governance Week 2023 because we have the opportunity to be here with you all, the CCGI team, other sponsors and participants, co-creating our contribution to future generations. And yes, we do need to do this together. Kamala mentioned earlier that this year, 2023, the Massy Group has turned 100 years old. And we have been celebrating since February, and not because it's Carnival. But it is a time for celebration. But it is also a moment for contemplation. What do we want to create for the next 100 years? What would this board and this leadership team, as we are here together at this point in history, our time in history, what would be the legacy of who we collectively are as Massy? We are individually and collectively aligned on our vision to be a global force for good, an investment holding company with a Caribbean heart. The Massy way has been and will continue to be characterized by a journey of learning, unlearning, and relearning. But the era that we live in now, however, can only be described as unprecedented. Global cooperation is more important now than it ever was. And across the Caribbean basin, we are increasingly susceptible to every kind of shock, from supply chains to the climate crisis. And as has happened over the last decade, we anticipate the next decade to be one of extraordinary technological advancements and extraordinary challenges. We're excited by the business opportunities that these will present, and even more excited by the good that many advancements can bring to the quality of human life and our capacity to care for the environment. However, we fundamentally understand that while new products and technologies come and go, the right core values are needed if you want longevity. That's how we survived and grew from the times of Morse codes now to an age of QR codes. Our ambitions and goals are many, but at the core of it, what we value most is being a people-centered company. More precisely, a people-centered company with a Caribbean heart. We have literally built our operational model to leverage warmth, compassion, and human-to-human connection found in abundance in the Caribbean to unlock the very best in people in a business setting anywhere in the world. Massy is a global company with a Caribbean heart, and we don't say that as a catchphrase. We say that because that is who and what we truly are. In a turbulent and rapidly evolving global landscape, we understand that the private sector has a vital role to play in facilitating sustainable development and creating prosperity in the societies within which we operate. We recognize the responsibility that has been placed in our hands to always place people at the center of our vision. We are not perfect, but we are committed to ensuring that when all is said and done, our legacy is one that we can be proud of. Massy is in growth mode. 13,000 people and growing. A portfolio of 60 companies and growing. In 8 countries and growing. On 2 continents and growing. And why? It is because we believe in growth for good. Our pursuit of profits is driven by our pursuit of purpose. We believe that by our work and by our investments, we will facilitate Caribbean-wide growth, a kind of growth that won't only change the trajectory for one person or one family or one generation. We aspire to the kind of growth that would catapult the region into its next phase of development that will impact people's lives. A Caribbean heart can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can speak to our vibrance, our tenacity, our spiritedness, or discipline, of magnetism, or frankness. To know us is to love us. And that's why when we say a Caribbean heart, we mean all of it. Every single piece that makes us whole, our experiences, our wins, our losses, our past and our future, the sum of all the arrivals and departures, Amerindian, European, African, Indian, Chinese, Middle Eastern, coming, going, and most importantly, staying to shape the Caribbean. That is our heart in all its beautiful complexity. So from our origins to the next 100 years, we, Massy, will be the sum of our parts. We are the sum of all our people. And over the past 100 years, we have proven that we can move the needle financially in local, regional, and global markets. And as we embark on our next 100 years, we are focused on moving the needle with initiatives that transform everyday lives, both for current and future generations. Happy birthday to Massy, as we do the work to set the platform for 100 more years. Let this time, by our hearts, to care for people, our planet, and our business, to lead from our values, especially love and care. Thank you to the board and staff at CCGI for amplifying the focus on such a critical issue, governing for future generations. Thank you. Back to you, Faye.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And thank you very much to your 100-year-old Massy for their support as platinum sponsor for our conference this year. Thank you very much. But then, Kamala, shall I move on to
Nigel? It's Nigel.
Asking Nigel to provide his welcoming remarks. So Nigel, let me just introduce you. I'm pretty sure I don't have to. I'm sure everyone is very familiar with our chairman, but protocol demands that I introduce you as our chairman and standing member of the Institute for a very long time. He has been our chairman since January the 1st, 2020. He is a banker and chartered accountant with extensive experience in public accounting and banking across the globe, and is also a seasoned director and chairman of both public company boards as well as nonprofit organizations. As applies to all of us who serve on the Institute's board, Nigel is passionate about corporate governance and the purpose of organizations. Nigel?
Thank you very much, Faye, and I must thank Kamala for her passion, her energy, and her hard work. She has an indomitable spirit, and I can assure you we would not be here today without her leadership. In his book, Speed and Scale, published in 2021, John Doerr, a venture capitalist best known for his early investments in companies such as Google, Amazon, and Netscape, tells us about his 15-year-old daughter advising him back in 2006. She was 15 in 2006. 17 years ago, that she was scared and angry about the planet that we were leaving for our children and grandchildren. He notes the effects of a runaway global warming are already plain to see. Devastating hurricanes, biblical flooding, uncontrollable wildfires, killer heat waves, and extreme droughts. He notes, and I agree, that we are not cutting our emissions fast enough to outrun the damage on our doorstep. What we are doing is not nearly enough, and unless we course correct with urgent speed and at massive scale, we'll be staring at a doomsday scenario. The melting polar ice caps will drown coastal cities. Failed crops would lead to widespread famine. And by mid-century, 1 billion souls worldwide could be climate refugees. Doerr is also a proponent of the use of OKRs, objectives, and key results, which he expounds on in his book, Measure What Matters. He advises that there is a time when panic is the appropriate response. And he believes that time has come. We can no longer afford to underestimate our climate emergency. To avert irreversible catastrophic consequences, we need to act urgently and decisively. To stave off a climate catastrophe, our goal must be to prevent any additional greenhouse gas accumulation and drive carbon dioxide equivalents back from over 500 parts per million to under 430 parts per million, and keep it there. The purpose of good corporate governance is to ensure that a company is managed in a responsible and ethical manner, and that protects the interests of all stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, and the broader community. Good corporate governance helps to establish a framework of policies, procedures, and controls that promote transparency, accountability, and effective decision-making. Good corporate governance can help to improve a company's performance by ensuring that it is managed in a strategic and effective manner. So what can we as governance professionals do to ensure that we act urgently and decisively to avert the irreversible and catastrophic consequences of climate change? What objectives and key results should we be advocating? How can we help to identify, manage, and mitigate the risk posed by climate change to ensure that future generations can survive and thrive? How can we ensure that our decision-making processes are transparent and that executives are held accountable for their actions? And how can we build trust with our stakeholders to improve our organizations' reputations and enroll all stakeholders in the work needed to save our planet? This week, we hope to provide the answers to some of these questions as we explore various options for governing with future generations in mind, and various ways to achieve a circular economy and get to zero net emissions. I look forward to the contributions of our panelists and attendees. Thank you. See?
Thank you very much, Nigel. Boy, you're very thought-provoking at this beginning of Corporate Governance Week, but that's what we need. Thank you very much. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Nandi Mandela, who will give the feature opening address for this Governance Week, Circular World, Governing for Future Generations. Ms. Nandi Mandela is a director at Linda Masinga and Associates, a town planning and development consultancy since 2003. She's also a founder member and director of the Massy Mandela, I hope I get these names correct, Properties Limited, a property development company, and also of an investment company owned by women, which was one of the companies involved in the development of the new King Shaka International Airport in South Africa. She has worked in the corporate sector in various fields for more than 10 years, including various positions at British Petroleum in South Africa and New York, ranging from a sales manager, an international relations manager, and a public relations manager. Her 29 years of work experience in various fields, corporate sector, development consulting, property development, and stakeholder management, have added depth to her academic qualifications and accentuated her keen interest in working with communities at various strata of society through development facilitation, sales, marketing, and corporate social investment programs. She's currently a non-executive director at New National Assurance Company, a medium-sized short-term insurance company in South Africa, as well as for the KwaZulu-Natal Philharmonic Orchestra, a leading premier orchestra on the African continent. She will be joining us from South Africa, where it is just after 10:30 p.m. We are very grateful for her indulging us and accommodating us to be here at this hour. We're deeply grateful that she has made herself available, and we look forward to hearing from her. Nandi, I welcome you to Governance Week.
Thank you very much, Faye, for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to send my greetings to everyone. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Okay. I'd like to send my greetings to everyone, the members of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, CCGI. A big thank you to Kamla for inviting me to be part of the keynote address for this evening. So please forgive me, it's nighttime in South Africa. So if I switch between afternoon and evening, I hope I will be forgiven. My topic tonight is to address the importance of integrity and purpose towards sustainability for future generations. I'd also like to thank Professor Garrett for introducing me to Kamla. Kamla, I was hoping you can help me just flight my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to highlight the key points. I'm not going to go through every sentence of my presentation. What I have tried to do, can you go to the next slide, was to break down my topic, which is to address the importance of integrity and purpose towards sustainability for future generations. And I've broken down my topic into three key areas. I'm giving very briefly the introduction of where we are, where I believe we are, on the ESG imperatives, what needs to be done. And I'll take you through what I believe is the integrity of ensuring that the data that the companies, individuals, and organizations share is measurable, is authentic, and is consistent throughout an organization, a company, and various institutions. We have a tendency of companies that publish results that only reflect a portion of their operations. Most of these companies are domiciled in developing countries or developed countries, the first world countries, UK, USA, Australia, Canada, Japan, etc. They adhere to ESG principles in those environments, but yet when they go to developing, underdeveloped, and poor countries, they flout the ESG rules. And yet their reporting does not reflect any of this. So it's important that when people or organizations publish their results, it's all encompassing. And the way that they handle each platform where they operate should be consistent with where the company is headquartered. We can't have companies that claim to adhere to ESG principles. They claim to be the people that are moving ahead of the curve in terms of making sure that they adhere to the ESG principles, and yet they apply different rules. They flout the human rights abuses when nobody is watching, presumably in countries that are underdeveloped, and yet in the companies where they are headquartered, and many other developed countries or first world countries, we apply the different rules. So we have noticed in the recent past that ESG is evolving and it's growing in its importance. And it is also becoming a business imperative. This is because it's not business as usual. While companies in the past have focused measurements on good performance as only financial performance, what the different stakeholder groups are trying to focus on is to ensure that they also look at the non-financial performance, which are human rights issues, ensuring that there is no exploitation of labor, ensuring that ethical business conduct is held up to scrutiny. It is therefore important for businesses to have clear objectives that are sustainable into the future without damaging the environment, people, and the operations where they have their businesses. Can I have the next slide, please? So my presentation will focus mostly on the G of the ESG, because we believe that this is a foundation of achieving your environmental and sustainability goals. And it is through the pursuit of ethical ESG standards that we can have accurate ESG reporting. We need to be also answering the following questions. What is required to achieve non-financial ESG results that can be trusted? There is no use to actually publish results that nobody can believe, or results that are selective on what measurements you take out of the ESG while you actually hide the others. That speaks to integrity, and it speaks to the results that are not easy to believe. We need to ensure that the data that we publish is qualitative, it can be measured, and is easily accessible. So all of these principles will ensure that the data that we share with the stakeholders, be it your investors, your funders, your markets, pressure groups like environmentalists, human rights activists, must be able to measure, test, and verify those results. And while the company or organization publish that, they must make sure that it's completely transparent and open. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I just move my hand up so that you can give me the next slide? So let's look at what we mean by integrity. There are 4 core principles that anchor ESG integrity. One of them, we need to make sure that our industries in various platforms, they conduct their business with integrity. They also need to pursue ESG standards that are ethical. They need to report openly, transparently, and with their performance, so that people, when they read those reports, they are able to see consistency of application throughout the company's operation. We know that companies have their core of stakeholders that they lobby from time to time to ensure that they adhere to policies and regulations. And mostly those are focusing on compliance issues. When they lobby with these stakeholders, it's important that they lobby responsibly. So because if they do that, can I get the next slides? If they do that, they will anchor the importance of the ESG principles. We also need to ensure that when these companies, when they collate data, it is systematic, reliable, and measurable. Some companies have embraced ESG principles, and yet some have been resisting. As a result of their resistance, they are greenwashing, they are the corrupt practices, and the non-adherence to ESG principles. So it is important that when they report on their standards on ESG, those are done in an ethical way. They must also make sure that the information they provide is authentic, factual, so that all of us, when you're looking at the information, you can regard it as true and as a true reflection of what the company represents and what they are aspiring to achieve on overall within their environment. I've already covered the issues of companies. Can I get the next slide? Of companies that apply different standards in different operations, and yet in the mother or the headquarters of their companies, they do something completely different. Over centuries, we'd like to believe that corporates always lead by example. And if corporates did not adapt to a changing environment, they would not survive. So we believe, therefore, that companies should be leaders, especially the private companies should be leaders in the ESG principles. They've got the resources, they are able, most of them are very profitable, and yet some of them are loathing the fact that they need to focus on non-financial measurements. So there needs to be a balance of them focusing on profits for their investors and shareholders, whereas on the other hand, they are damaging the environment. That flouts the circular economy, because if we do that, if we exploit the natural resources, if we exploit the people, and we flout the regulations of those countries by exploiting labor, we are working against the societal sustainability of that environment. There are companies that go to underdeveloped countries and take out their resources, and they leave the environment without the natural resources that they have found there. I mean, if you think about the company that actually sells water, and they go to underdeveloped countries and they exploit the resources there, the people that are not paid a living wage, they are selling the water in all the developed countries, and yet they take the water from poor communities and they leave them behind without a natural resource as important as water. So we can't have a situation where companies are making obscene profits at the behest of the local community that has been thriving before those companies come into those areas, and they leave them destitute without even water to drink. So ESG must not be seen as a tick box exercise by the company. They must not be selective on which elements of ESG they must report on. And they must also ensure that they make a balancing act between reporting on financial performance as well as investing into the future, because if we continue with crass materialism, crass consumerism, and encourage people to consume more and more, we will have nothing to leave to our future generations, to our children and our grandchildren and future generations, because most companies focus on profits, and more profits, and they neglect the components that are non-financial in terms of their performance. So we need to make sure that if we want to create a sustainable environment, we don't just focus on profit, we also focus on the wellness of the environment, your ecosystem, the entire value chain of how you run your business, how you train your employees to have a culture that focuses on financial performance and balancing it out with non-financial performance. Can I have the next slide, please? The next topic I'm addressing now is to look at what is the purpose of doing all of this. ESG will ensure that your company is sustainable over a very long time. And we need to make sure that companies don't just talk about this at the senior level, but it is a culture that permeates to all levels of the company. Companies also need to find innovative ways of running successful businesses that will ensure that resources are not wasted, resources are preserved, because this is our collective asset as a human race. So we need to make sure that people within the company are trained on how to ensure that they are not wasteful in the way that they produce. They are not wasteful in the terms of how they do transportation. They also find partners in the entire value chain that also see ESG as a core of their business. And through leveraging their position in society and as leading companies, they will put pressure on those companies as their partners of choice if they also adhere to ESG principle. Because if these companies continue to exploit people and not adhere to ESG principles, they also will be damaging the reputation of that company. So then the company needs to make sure that for the smartest people and the best people that are operating in their company, that will buy in to the culture of promoting ESG principles. Can I get the next slide, please? I think this slide is actually talking to double materiality, because most companies have had a single focus for hundreds and thousands of years. Now is the time, because we are running out of time. We are living in a ticking bomb of an environment that could exploit, and this is the only environment we have where we can live in harmony and be able to live it in a manner that will enable future generation to be able to live properly. We have earthquakes that are shocking in different parts of the world. There is flooding, and all of this has to do with greenhouse emissions. So if companies had to look at their environment and see how they can look at their production line and see whether they can revamp their IT, they can reevaluate how they do their production to streamline everything, make sure that when they produce, they don't produce in a way that damages the environment. So can I get the next slide? So mostly the executive of the company need to lead by example by making sure that the senior management, next slide again, the senior management of the company is putting systems in place on the manufacturing side, on training people to work responsibly within the environment, and also look at the principles that are being used by CFOs in different companies. The CFO, can I also get the next slide? The CFO of the company has an internal audience, and they also have an external audience. And for both of them, they are able to have a clear oversight of the different operations within the company. They have an eye on equipment, machinery, and the production process that is required. So if the manufacturing manager is looking for new equipment and new machinery, they also have to touch sides with the financial director or the CFO of the company. If the HR is looking for people that are aligned to the company culture on conforming to the ESG principle and achieving good results and tracking their performance, they need to get a budget and approval from the financial director. So each component, whether it's IT, whether it's the production line, whether it's transportation of your goods and services, each one of those components have to go through the chief financial officer, because he manages the budget internally, while he also manages the communication that goes to the external environment, which is mostly your investors, your shareholders, your funders, including the non-financial aspects of stakeholders, which will include your pressure groups. So the key parameters that companies need to look at is to understand what risks they have as a company, what their stakeholders are looking for. They need to design an ESG metrics for their full operation so that they can understand where the pressure points are. They need to measure and manage expectations internally, and also focus on where they are as a company in terms of meeting their ESG goals and where they want to go as a company. If there's a gap in between where they are and where they want to go, they need to make sure that they close the gap. It must be clear how they plan to move from point A to point B, because if that is not clear, there is the personnel within the company are going to be confused on how to get their ESG to reach the targets that they want, to reach the target that the company has set for itself. They need to be able to track those changes. They need to focus on the long-term program, as well as the short-term program. The short-term could be a week, a month, a quarter, a year, and be able to measure those outputs. For example, if a plastic manufacturing company that sells water, so I need a glass of water. Thank you. That needs to sell water. They need to ensure that the plastic that they used to carry their product is recyclable. If you look at how all of us consume water, we use bottled water, whether it's still or still water or the other type. I don't drink it. I only drink still water. But what happens to that plastic when you finish using it? Do you know where it goes? Does the company even bother to know what happens after the customer has used the plastic? So many companies have already started to look at alternatives, and they do a collection, which is part of the recycling that is required by companies. They look at how they can collect the plastic and how they can look at their suppliers of the plastic to ensure that the plastic is recycled at least 100 times before it goes to the dump site. That's how we can ensure that we preserve our environment and make sure that we don't hurt the environment where we work in. Your car manufacturing company needs to speak to the oil companies to make sure that they also have unleaded fuel and use different types of renewable fuel that can assist in limiting the greenhouse gases that go into the environment. And the same goes for your aeroplanes, your buses, everything that we use, even if it's the restaurant, how do they recycle the things that they use within the restaurant to make sure that all of this doesn't end at the dump site and it also damages the environment. We do not want to continue to hurt our environment because this is the only asset that we have and it needs to be shared responsibly. Can I get the next slide? This image indicates what the similarities between our financial reporting and ESG reporters. The finance guy and the executive of the company are looking at the internal stakeholders. So the finance guy, which is what I'm suggesting, that we should use the same principles that are used by financial reporting for ESG reporting, because they use rigor to make sure that the information is accurate, is quick to measure, and the information is easily accessible for everyone that looks at the financial report. No company can go to the markets and publish reports that cannot be verified. So in the same way, they should also look at what the regulators are doing, what are they looking for, how far are they from meeting those targets? They also need to see how the ESG is implemented in their various platforms. They need to make sure that they give the investors the proper information so that the investors themselves are starting to use leverage to enforce companies that have the reluctance to meet the ESG imperatives. Can I get the next slide, please? There needs to be alignment between the board, the senior executives, the management of the companies, including how they treat their customers. Because without this, the company will not be able to achieve ESG goals. If the company, can I get the next slide? If the company doesn't show its employees how they can ensure that the entire production process is synchronized and is aligned to achieving the goals of the entire organization, then it becomes difficult for the company to move in a seamless fashion to meet those regulations. We have companies that actually have to look at how they operate. And then if it means that they have to progressively change how the old equipment is not compliant in terms of environmental management, they have to work with the CFO to make sure that they start changing the way the manufacturing happens progressively so that the company can be able to move from a company that pollutes the air, from a company that damages the environment, and also the way that they employ their human resources within the company to ensure that it is not exploitative. Can I get the next slide, please? How do we ensure that future generations benefit from all of this? It is no secret that our environment is hemorrhaging. We have 8 billion people that live on this planet. And yet we, all of us, future generations, past generations, have been beneficiaries of things that have happened 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, and they have provided with the governance framework that we take for granted today. For example, democracy is a political framework that we take for granted, and that was started by people thousands of years ago. Policy development for the law and our jurisprudence are things that happened thousands of years ago. Accounting frameworks help us to govern how we manage our finances in businesses. And if you look at the physical environment and what we have achieved as humankind, we've got electricity, we have computers, television. All of these are the benefits that we enjoy, which have made our life and lifestyles much better. The problem that we have today is the promotion of class consumerism, as well as accumulating of wealth at the expense of everything, including our environment, which damages the atmosphere. Can we get the next slide, please? The young generation are starting to ask very uncomfortable questions about their environment because they stand to benefit. However, if we are damaging the climate, they are inheriting the damage which they have to clean up long before their parents and their generation have left this world. So we need to make sure that the ticking bomb that we are all sitting in is addressed by finding innovative solutions and without making sure that each of the elements of the ESG or environmental sustainability and governance are things that are topmost in our minds. Next slide, please. We only have one planet. We only have one environment. And if we damage any of this, it means then our future is not guaranteed. We don't know how long all of these catastrophes are going to be manifesting. We've got typhoons, we've got earthquakes, we have pestilences, we have all sorts of things that are damaging their climate. And all of this have this one source, and the source that many of us are engaging as individuals in practices that we know are damaging to the environment. We also need to be asking ourselves a question: what are we as individuals doing? We can't just look at the private and the public sector. We can't just be looking at the government policies. You can't just be looking at the statutory requirements when we ourselves as the population are not doing our bit. Imagine if each one of us were to do a little bit just to make things better for all of us. People that are in this audience have people in very, very high positions. They have direct contacts with CEOs, CFOs, and chief operating officers, chief sustainability officers. What are we doing to make sure that we work in sync with those organizations? We have friends, we have family, we are living in a ticking bomb, and yet we all have the separation of 6 degrees to the next influential person. Have we given it our all to try and do what we can to save the environment? So let's not look at other institutions. Let's not look at the private and public sector. Let's not look at government. Let's also look at our own peers, be it academics, funders, shareholders. Let's make sure that we walk this journey together. We can also use our collective wisdom to make sure that, and our collective resources, to make sure that we walk this journey together. Individually, we are not able to achieve more, but if we hold our hands together and look at what we can do as a collective, we can achieve the tipping point that is required to move ahead and live in an environment that is safe, an environment that we can live and bequeath to our children and next generations, to make sure that we reverse the tide of the greenhouse effect that we see on the environment. Next slide, please. Each one of us can also use our leverage, depending where we are in society. We can build confidence in our activities. We can share with our peers what we are doing. We can encourage our peers to do more. We can also move a step ahead by ourselves doing more to make this environment a better place. When we look at our ecosystem, we need to make sure that the value chain speaks to what we are trying to achieve for our ESG imperatives. From harvesting a crop to the final point of selling to the end user. What are the processes that are involved in that value chain that can help us to refine our processes, improve our IT so that they can pick up in the value chain where we are lacking and where we can improve, to make sure that at the end of the day, when we send our products to the market, we know that we are doing in a responsible manner. The companies that are known, the bad ones, that have a bad reputation on the management of the greenhouse gases, are doing their bit, but each one of us in our respective areas, how far have we gone from assessing where we are and where we believe we should be going as individuals, individual companies, as ESG activists? Have we spoken to our clients and assisted them to see how they can overhaul their manufacturing and the entire ecosystem in ensuring that from cradle to grave, each element in that value chain or manufacturing process is ESG compliant, without ensuring that at each stage of the production line and putting pressure on various activities. And if there's no alignment with various partners at a personal level, inter-organizational level, at governance level, and at various policy-making frameworks, academics play a very important role by advising companies, institutions, how are we pushing the envelope to make sure that we all sing from one theme song to ensure that we achieve our ESG goals much quicker. The next slide, please, which I think will be the last one. We have many questions that will linger on if we do not address our ESG imperatives. The transformation needs to be fast. We are running out of time. And if we do not address these questions, we are going to be found wanting. We need to understand each one of us, wherever we are as an institution, as an individual, as an organization, as a policymaker, whether we have bridged the gap from where we are and where we believe we should be to adhere to ESG principles. Is your company making a negative impact wherever you operate? Whether it's in a developed world or it's in a developing or underdeveloped world. We can apply different principles and be inconsistent in how we report on what we do. Are we hiding certain elements of our ESG reporting? Are we able to quantify the data that we present to the public? How is this data even collected? Are we able to go back and verify? Is the information easily accessible? And how have you measured where we are? Do you have timelines? Do you have goals? What are your short-term goals? Have you gone back to see how you fared during the program that you have set for yourself to move from point A to point B? Can you back up those results? Can you verify that information? And more importantly, how far are you from achieving your own goals? Some of these goals can be achieved during a shorter time if we all make a concerted effort to move in the same direction. That is from the CEO of the company to the sweeper or the cleaner of the company. If we are aligned in making sure that we adopt an ESG culture within the company, then we will get to the end goal much quicker. Companies that are reluctant to embrace ESG goals are just simply working against the whole mission of improving our goals towards a sustainable, equitable, and environmentally friendly environment. Greenwashing cannot be tolerated. So those companies that don't have a full disclosure of how their operations are happening in all different platforms of the company are simply being disingenuous, and they're not focusing on what is required to make this a better place. So we need to make sure that we as these generations may leave this world a better place than how we found it. And it is all within us to be able to make that difference. Can I get the last slide? I thought that this was the last one. Well, thank you very much for giving me and allowing me time to share my thoughts on this very important subject. We only have one Earth. We don't have another one. I don't think any of us have aspirations to live on another planet. This is our only home. This is a home to our children, our grandchildren, and we all need to move together because collectively we can do so much more, and we can use our collective wisdom and our collective resources to bridge the gap between where we are, almost at a tipping point of going backwards and losing what we have, versus where we believe we should be in terms of preserving the only home that we have, which is Mother Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very thought-provoking and passionate call to action. I think we must all be feeling very uncomfortable in our seats right now, but we do need to move ahead. I would like to now invite our chairman, Mr. Nigel Romano, to introduce the panel and kick that off for us this afternoon. Nigel.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Nandi, for a very comprehensive presentation. It certainly puts the problem in front of us in a very clear perspective. The topic of the discussion this afternoon is about managing or governing for future generations, for our children, for our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. And I have a very competent panel with me this afternoon, starting with Terry Peterson, former advisor of the Corporate Governance Council of St. Martin. Terry has over 15 years experience in corporate banking, so he's a banker like me, and Oliver. He has an impressive record of leadership accomplishments in human rights law, corporate social responsibility, and corporate governance. We also have Cavell Joseph St. Omer, President of the Human Resource Management Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and a globally recognized human resources executive with over 20 years experience working to effectively balance big picture thinking and strategic planning with hands-on execution. And we certainly need some hands-on execution with the crisis that we face. Camille Facey from Jamaica, an attorney at law for over 35 years. He's currently the managing partner at the law firm Facey Law, a practice focused on company law, real estate, wills, trust and estates, telecommunications, and corporate governance. She's a fellow director of the CCGI, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, and Jamaica's National Solid Waste Management Authority. She also chairs the Corporate Governance Committee of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. And last but not least, Oliver Jordan is chairman of Caribbean Strategic Advisors Incorporated, which provides a range of governance, financial, and risk advisory services to public and private sector clients in the Caribbean. In addition to being a fellow director of the CCGI, he's also chairman of the Financial Services Commission of Barbados, with responsibility for regulating non-bank financial institutions, and is special advisor to the Minister of Finance for the reform and restructuring of a number of state-owned entities. So I will ask Terry to kick off the discussion this afternoon, and I would urge you, all the panelists to be as concise and as focused as possible, so that we can get into the discussion afterwards. Terry, go ahead.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and good night to Nandi Mandela. I must say that it is a very humbling experience for me to share the platform with the granddaughter of Nelson Mandela, one of my personal and favorite heroes. So I'm extremely humbled, despite it being a virtual platform. And to my esteemed panelists, I also would like to say I really appreciate being in your midst and to be able to dialogue and share on this. I would like to talk by starting off with where Nandi left off. I recall the words of her grandfather on his release from prison in 1990, where he said, our struggle has reached a decisive moment. We call on our people to seize this moment so that the process towards democracy is rapid and uninterrupted. We have waited too long for our freedom. We can no longer wait. Now is the time to intensify our struggle on all fronts. To relax our efforts now would be a mistake, which generations to come will not be able to forgive. The sight of freedom is looming on the horizon, and this should encourage us to redouble our efforts. While these words were meant for freedom and democracy, I think that we can apply these words here today. It is a decisive moment. Nigel placed it accurately when he talked about that we need to act urgently and decisively in this moment. And repeatedly, Nandi said, it is a ticking time bomb. And we were running out of time. And she also said we were running out of water when she had that glass of water. So it's a very decisive moment for us. Why? In that small section of that speech, Nelson Mandela said that we need to seize the moment. And this is the moment, again, for corporate citizenship. This is what we are talking about, because corporate citizenship seems to be very minimal while companies continue their core activities as usual. We have the nominal discretionary giving, the goodwill, the donations, the philanthropy. We see the financial statements with incremental notes about ESG on the financial statements or in the notes. We see vague metrics about or small mentions of ESG and ESR, and also the greenwashing that takes place by corporate and large companies. A simple example would be you have a large retail group talking about banning plastic bags, while at the same time they have kids who are packing bags, who are working, they're on the age, they're not in school as they should be. Why? Because their parents can't afford to pay for 3 meals a day, and they're stuck selling packing bags for large corporations. So here we see it again, the greenwashing. And I believe that corporate organizations should acknowledge that they have a greater responsibility to society. And it's because of this, they have this unique opportunity to improve society. So this is the moment, the decisive moment for corporate citizenship. It is also decisive because all of us in the Caribbean are experiencing rising temperatures. Last week, I read a news article where experts are saying they're concerned about flesh-eating bacteria in Sargassum on our beaches. We have seen what's happening with the Canadian fires. I called my dad just a week ago to find out how he was doing in the extreme heat in St. Lucia, in the countryside. And then when I asked about drinking water, he said to me that the pressure of his pee was stronger than the pressure of the water coming out of the pipe. So we are at a decisive moment. And that's from a 76-year-old gentleman who understands where we are and where we are going in this world at the moment. So this is a very decisive moment. Nelson Mandela also said that we need to intensify our struggle on all fronts. What fronts are we talking about? Global and regional cooperation, sustainable development, resource management, climate action, social equity, education, innovation. I can't elaborate on all of them because I know my esteemed panelists also have areas that they would like to contribute. Education and innovation, biodiversity, regional connectivity, conflict resolution, intergenerational collaboration and cooperation. These are all areas, all fronts that we need to intensify our struggle. I will just comment on just two, which are very, very close to my heart. And one of them being intergenerational collaboration. We cannot talk about the future generation without involving the future generation. If the future generations are legitimate stakeholders, then corporations and corporate boards should direct their activities in a manner that is just and fair to the future stakeholders. We have to foster intergenerational collaboration. We have to recognize the importance of involving young people in the decision-making process. We have to provide the platforms for youth engagement. We have to encourage and empower young people to contribute their ideas, their perspectives and solutions to shaping the future of the world. This would ensure that the interests and aspirations of future generations are actively considered in the policy making and governance directives of government and boards. Nelson Mandela says to relax our efforts now would be a mistake which generations to come will not be able to forgive. And finally, I would just like to mention on the section about where he talks about global cooperation and regional cooperation. For years, we've been talking in the Caribbean about Caribbean community and Caribbean unity, and we are so not close to these shared goals. We have to recognize the interconnectedness of our community, of our world, our societies, and our ecosystems, and promote collaboration to achieve those shared goals. He says we cannot relax our efforts. We need to redouble our efforts to be able to achieve those shared goals. And it is very sad that being in the Caribbean, surrounded by so much water and so many rivers, so many ponds, so many lakes. I mean, even this island, this small island of 37 square miles that I'm on, there used to be 21 freshwater ponds, and now they're down to 16. I mean, it's just a shame that we are not doing enough to harvest water, to provide water. And there's so many homes in the Caribbean where there's not sufficient water on the table for our people. So we need to do something globally. We need to cooperate more. Global cooperation and regional cooperation needs to take place. I would like to close with the words of another favorite hero of mine, Dr. Martin Luther King, who talked about the inescapable network of mutuality, saying that we are tied in a single garment of destiny. And that was from the letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963. It says, all life is interrelated. Justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. So as I stand on the periphery of the underside of that circularity, I'm contemplating whether future generations would embrace the governance and circular solution that we have for them, or that we are etching out for them, or will they forge their own paths? Will we, in our efforts, be compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs? These are questions that we will have to answer as we talk throughout this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terry. That was excellent. I like how you brought the great Nelson Mandela into the conversation. Thank you very much. Cavell, the man has opened the batting. Let's see how you follow up.
Indeed, I got 2 sixes, one after the other. I hope I can hit a 6 too. Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening to you, Miss Mandela, in South Africa, joining us, and also Professor Garrett in the UK. I think we can all agree that the term future generation, it really refers to all those who come after us. That much we're quite clear on. And we recognize that their lives and their eventual ability to effectively enjoy all the human rights and to be able to meet their needs and to be able to not have the actions we take to influence their ability to have a decent living in the future. We recognize that there's some kind of interconnectedness that we could agree on, right? While young people and children alive today may have overlapping interests and a special affinity to future generations and some of the things that we must consider, we must recognize that we cannot or should not bear the burden of advocating or trying to impose that on this generation, this young generation today, advocating for those to come in the future. They deserve their own seat at the table and their own place in terms of decision-making for things that impact them today, right? This includes, to an extent, the ability to serve and to be able to have a seat at decision-making tables, the ability to, at least for us, to ensure that better use of foresight, science, and data in terms of decision-making is now included in what we do, the ability to define in their own way or at least have a forum in which they can now declare their interests in terms of what they want to see and how they envision the future. And we can also have a forum where best practices can be shared. A lot was shared by Ms. Mandela, and she did identify some of the C-suite positions that included the CEO, the COO, the CIO, the CRO, but didn't see the CHRO. And for some reason, we tend to leave out HR out of these conversations, right? And HR has a key role to play in all of this. And that was one of the C's that I noticed was missing. HR can play a critical role in implementing some of these ESG strategies that we're talking about within companies. HR departments have a responsibility for managing the workforce. This includes ensuring employees are working in a safe and healthy environment. HR also ensures that corporate policies and practices are aligned with ESG goals. So even if boards and the leadership are making decisions and setting policy, HR's role is to ensure that those policies are enforced and that the culture of the company and what is deemed the culture of the company that is embedded based on, again, the statements. We all have value statements, corporate value statements and mission statements and corporate values and goals that are established. It's HR role to ensure and to incorporate this and to ensure that the strategies can help not only the culture to be shifted and focus around ESG matters, but we also attract and retain top talent that will allow for us to continue the work that is established by boards and senior leadership and all the C-suite personnel. Many employees today are looking for companies that are socially responsible and committed to sustainability. The workforce has shifted significantly, and we do have 5 generations within the workspace right now. And at the end of the day, how do we promote ESG-friendly working environments and workspaces? How can we attract and retain the best talent who will be passionate about it as well and will want to make an impact and a difference in the world? That's all part of what we do. Additionally, promoting an ESG-friendly workplace can also improve employee engagement around the issue and productivity. Employees who are proud of the companies that they're working for, especially when these companies are ethical, when these companies operate in a socially responsible manner, they are more likely to be engaged and motivated and to work harder in the interest of the organization. This can certainly lead to increased productivity and overall success, business success. HR has a part to play in all of this in terms of setting out the HR strategy, ensuring that the company is socially responsible, sustainable, and attractive, not only to investors, because part of that whole reporting, and I know there's a lot of focus on financials, but the goodwill that is associated with the reputation, the quality of work, etc., that also helps an organization to attract the top talent. And by promoting ESG-friendly workplaces, HR can improve employee engagement around the issue and contribute to overall success. During the last 2 years, during this pandemic, the combination of the pandemic, the increased awareness of social issues, the great resignation, a lot has changed responsibilities of the chief human resource officers and HR departments as a whole. In fact, during that time, a lot of companies turned to HR to assist with implementing and shifting very quickly to ensure businesses continued. Why not turn to us where this is concerned as well, where we now want to look at, again, the importance of attracting and retaining the best, where we want to have serious consideration around whether or not we have the right talent, whether or not the right principles are being promoted, whether we have the right reporting systems in place, whether people feel that they're included or not, whether we have the environment where employees feel that they're free to communicate and to speak up when things are going wrong. It is now up to us to play a greater role in addressing ESG issues and to ensure that all stakeholders, which includes investors, the board of directors, employees, the community alike, that we actually put the S in the ESG from the social component part of it, right? And we must recognize that. And that would be my introduction to the conversation until we engage in further dialogue this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Without people and engaged people, we can't do it. Thank you for that reminder. Camille.
Good afternoon, all. And let me, Nandi, add from the Jamaican perspective, how much we revered your grandfather. And we thank your family for sharing him with the world. But what is good to know is that the Mandela name and contribution to the world lives on through you and the contributions you're making. So as I think about this issue, we recognize that our generation, Nigel, we have not done well by future generations. Now, that's not to say that the problem started with us. Throughout the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s, and I'm not suggesting, Nigel, that you and I are from the 1800s, but we certainly are from the 19s. And throughout this time, the major objective of business was to provide a return on investment, right? Profit. That was what businesses were set up to do. And it really didn't matter how the profit was made, whether it was through the slave trade or depletion of natural resources, like Nandi was sharing with us with the water from that poor community, or environmental pollution. The aim of business was to make a profit. So now we're saying to these businesses, you have got to have a wider remit. Your responsibility entails looking, yes, at your purpose, but seeing how that purpose is being deployed and the impact it is having on the environment. Now, very often when this is done in the Caribbean, what you hear is that we didn't cause this problem, you know, this was caused by other parts of the world. And Terry gave us some good quotes, and I have a few that I actually share and with our business people when you get that kind of response. The 2021 Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network report stated that between 2009 and 2018, the world lost 14% of its coral. We were told that at 1.5 Celsius increase in temperature, coral reefs will decline by 70 to 90%. At 2 degrees, the world will lose more than 99% of its corals. We are Caribbean people. We go to the beach. We love our beaches. Tourism is a huge part of our economy. The coral produces the sand. And a quote that I will also share with you is by Michael Taylor. He is the professor of climate science and dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at UWI. And what he had to say is that even at a global warming level of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the islands of the Caribbean are only guaranteed half a chance of a livable future. Half a chance of a livable future. And it appears that we are going to exceed 1.5 degrees in terms of warming. So what are we in the Caribbean going to be? Climate refugees? The issues for us are not academic, they are real. And yes, we are annoyed that, these issues, we're minimal contributors to this. But the fact is that this is where we are now, so we have to deal with it. So, Nandi, what has been happening is our politicians and leaders, they have been talking at COP, and they have been talking about funding to build climate resilience. And so they are trying to do what they need to do. But we also have to, as you say, look at ourselves and look at what is happening on our domestic front with our businesses. And so I will share with you, we have a company, a big bauxite plant. And in 2022, they spilled chemicals into the Rio Cobre. And what that caused is that they polluted the water. The pH test, which assesses the alkalinity of water, revealed that the levels were as high as 11.3, and aquatic life cannot survive beyond 9. So the fishermen were impacted. You saw all the fish dead along the riverside. The crops were impacted because the farmers could not use the water to irrigate their fields. The people who drink the water from that river, they were impacted. So even as we complain about what is happening internationally, we have to look at what is happening locally, because that same company, I heard on the news in May that there was another spill. And so the question that we have to ask is, one, where is the organizational integrity that tells that company that they cannot keep operating in that way? Clearly there is none. So let us move beyond the company now to the government, because I think that is where the rubber is going to have to meet the road. We are going to have fines. We're going to have consequences that impact that same desire, that unfettered desire for profit. We're going to have to impact the profit of those persons who continue to do these kinds of things. Just like how when BP had that spill in the Gulf, they ended up paying what? $20 billion in fines. So we are going to have to look at the regimes that we put in place in the Caribbean. So we have a lot of entities like BlackRock and many of those organizations that are pooling the investors' thoughts and the views, and they're saying, we're only going to invest in those companies that have good ESG policies. And so, Nandi, when you spoke about ensuring that those ESG reports included developing countries, that really resonated with me. Because it never struck me that persons were producing these wonderful reports, but they were not including in them the impact that they were having in countries like ours. So we go back to the government and the policies that we have to put in place. But we also know, say, as citizens, governments do what we require of them. So as citizens, we now need to band together and say, this is our future. This is the future of our children and our grandchildren. And we are requiring our elected representatives to take these kinds of steps. So that's why sessions like today's are so important, to inform everybody, but also to get us together to say, how are we going to deal with these problems?
Thank you, Camille. Very passionate. Carrots and sticks. Both. We need both. Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to our keynote speaker. Very, very comprehensive presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll just focus my remarks really on the implications for the Caribbean, just sort of picking up on what Camille said, because what really struck me was the point that the keynote speaker made about developing countries still have some ways to go with ESG reporting, and I think that's absolutely important. I support Camille's point about us as citizens agitating for it, pushing governments, but I also think there's a role for the boards, the corporate boards, and I think perhaps this is where I'd like to see CCGI play a greater role. There may be some opportunities for us to maybe work alongside governments, develop ESG principles, but I think it's important for us to show the leadership as corporate directors and be able to advance the agenda. Going back to what Wendy, our platinum sponsor, said, the world of the future requires continuous learning, unlearning, and relearning. So we can't rest on where we are today. We have to think about the future, and we're going to have to continue to improve. So again, I'd like to throw out the challenge to CCGI to really play a more critical role in advancing the ESG agenda across the Caribbean.
Thank you very much. Do we have any, I see we have some comments from participants, but do we have any questions, or does anybody want to add to the debate? I think for me it is critical that we have very, very clear objectives and that we measure progress towards those objectives. And Nandi referred to it quite a bit, this whole concept of greenwashing, pretending to be focused on climate change, but just really not delivering on the reduction in greenhouse emissions, contributing to the reduction of carbon dioxide equivalents. This is where the rubber hits the road. So, Nandi, what are your thoughts? You've heard from the panel. We'd like to hear from you as to what are your initial takeaways?
Thank you, Nigel. I really like the point that was raised by Cavell when she highlighted that human resources are a very critical element because most of these blue chip companies or 500 Fortune companies operate, especially in our countries, with great impunity. And you know, if we work with the HR departments to make sure that the culture of the company permeates from the CEO to the to the cleaner of the company, we can make some progress. The caliber of people that are employed by the company need to embrace, including the CEO, all the C-suite executives need to embrace that culture. And if they are not aligned to the ESG principles, what hope do we have to make an impact in that environment? I also like the point that was raised by Kamel regarding the loss of diversity in the oceans. If we do not have water, how are we to survive? We are really at the tipping point. Time is not on our side. We need to work with each other and use our collective wisdom. And I think, I can't remember who said it now, we need to put pressure on the government and the public sector because they actually have the resources. I mean, you have CEOs of companies earning telephone numbers in terms of salary. I mean, we can't even count the numbers on their salary. And yet they cannot put aside a sizable budget to look after the very environment that is collectively owned by all of us. So there's an element of lack of commitment from these big institutions. And I think as citizens of different countries, we can't afford not to put more pressure to nudge these corporate polluters to do the right thing, because let's not be naive. They have the resources. They simply don't have the commitment to do what is right.
So do you believe that the big multinationals have, given their very deep pockets, that they have an obligation to step up? I was listening to Emmanuel Macron earlier today, and he was talking about, yes, climate change and counteracting climate change, but it should not come at the cost of people in developing countries, for instance, having to go hungry. And I thought that was a very interesting point, because most of the emissions don't come from the developing world, they come from the developed world. And therefore, some element of equity demands that they should be doing more than us and not putting the burden on for climate change on the developed world. Guyana, for instance, comes to mind, that they have just found all this oil. So how do you deal with that? Again, the whole question of equity comes to play here. Anybody, please feel free to jump in.
Nigel, I like the comment from Derek in the chat. Maybe we could invite Derek to
Derek.
share his point of view. Derek?
Oh, certainly. I'm not camera ready, so my apologies. No disrespect.
problem.
And good afternoon. Chair, good to be on the stage with you again. I have been reviewing a number of ESG reports, and I think, you know, there are certain things that it's well intended, but very superficial. I mean, I heard, I think it was yourself, Chair, mention along with another speaker that it's a ticking time bomb. I mean, if we were truly presented with a ticking time bomb, I don't think we would be trying to just do, you know, do some light makeup on the whole situation. We would address the problem. And there's more than enough intelligent people with tons of experience who know what the issues are. But I think, as we all know, the right thing is usually the more difficult thing to deal with. It's the more unpopular thing to deal with. And this is where, you know, I was really happy when Kamala and I started to chat about this, because I was curious to understand the connection between circularity and governance. And it's quite obvious. With the leadership that directors have. I mean, you truly are leaders of organizations, leaders of public entities and communities. And you can, as individuals, make a significantly bigger difference than the average person. Yes, everybody has a role to play. Government, policymakers, consumers. But there are certain people in society that can pull us together in the right direction, who have, I would say, less to lose, so to speak, to be able to bring the people together, including people who don't get along, who compete against each other, and to look beyond the typical KPIs that we tend to look at today for success. The fact is, we live on literally we live in one system. What's happening in Ukraine is affecting us. What's happening in Africa is affecting us. What will happen here will affect others. We can't just sit around and watch each other and point fingers at each other and wait for each other to act. But if we could get boards of directors, I mean, amazing people on this call today, as well as for the rest of the week, that could really make a change. And as was said a little earlier, it's not just for us. Many of us are parents. Many of us are grandparents. So it's real. It's real. And climate change is one thing. There's a lot of attention there, but that is just a symptom. I see that as a symptom of underlying root cause, that issues that we really need to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Good intervention. Here is the problem. Now, I mean, we obviously we attack or we highlight the multinationals and the bigger organizations, and we talk about what could happen in 30 years or 80 years by the end of the century. But how do we bring that home in a very real way so that people can really understand what they need to do as companies, as organizations, as individuals, to make the change? And how do we measure the impact? And should we be focused as the CCGI on shining the light as to what kind of impact these people are making? Is their impact on the environment declining or increasing? Do we have a role to play there? Kamala.
Before we go to the panelists, Nigel, in fact, Melanie Smith, who I think has joined us from Guyana,
yes,
has a comment to the chat, which I would be happy if she would share. Melanie, if you can unmute and you share your comment, because it actually addresses directly what Nigel just brought up, this whole issue of us being able in the region to identify the organizations and what they do. Go ahead, Melanie.
Hi, hi, everybody. This is a real pleasure to be here and to hear this discussion and how forward-looking it is. And I really believe that we as corporate entities do have a role to play and a power to bring to the change that we're speaking about. So I'm just very happy to be part of this. I'm wondering if you were asking me to comment on my what I was talking about, the importance of culture in the company.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I think what I had in mind is somebody who born in Guyana, grew up and spent most of my career in Canada and returned back to Guyana in 2016. I'm really struck at our institutions and organizations here in the Caribbean that seem so stuck in colonial ways of thinking and acting and interacting. And I think that's something we really, really need to address here in the region if we want to be competitive and lead and bring in the young people who actually are the ones who are going to have to do the work. So that's really what I was getting at.
You also mentioned that the way we work together as individual countries in the region, and how do you see the CCGI impacting bringing the leadership across the region together?
Well, truth be told, this is my very, very first interaction with CCGI. So I'm literally 2 hours into my relationship with you.
Okay.
But it just from the brief looks I've taken at the website and comments I've heard from others who've interacted with this organization as quote unquote top notch. And based on the discussion I'm hearing here, I just have a sense that CCGI has that capacity and capability to, and there are people from all kinds of places around this table. So we have everything, it seems, in place to start bringing people together in these discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Camille, you wanted to say something?
I think Saron has a hand up.
Who has a hand up?
Saron.
Saron, go ahead, Saron. Saron Bailey. And then we'll have Terry and Camille. Go ahead, Saron.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much, Nandi. I really, really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you to the panelists. I just have a short point to make something that Terry said, in that we must involve the future generations if we're talking about building for future generations. And just to give a personal experience, I consider myself a young person. Most of the persons that are within my personal network is between the age group of 30 to 45. Yeah, I'm a parent. So yes, I can speak to wanting to leave that legacy for my 4-year-old and my 10-year-old, as well as the persons within my network are young business owners, young entrepreneurs. Yeah, so there's a need, what I noticed in conversations with them is there's a need for them to really buy in to that link between ESG and sustainability. Because we're having our nice casual conversations in our lives. It's like, yes, we want to leave our businesses for our kids and we want to, leave this legacy. But when I am talking about how that could be done, ESG, environmental factors, social factors, good corporate governance, they say, well, so and that's for you, right? That's for you to do. You just handle that, right? So are you just saying that you want to leave your business for your kids? So we need to really match our behavior with what we are saying, even as young people. And Camille mentioned the fact that, the generations past didn't do a good job. And yes, some of them will say, well, this is what we met and this is our parents. Okay, so this is what we met. Are we going to just say this is what we met and continue the cycle? Are we going to break the mold so that we could actually leave a legacy for our future generations? I'm listening to the rep from Massy, and all I'm hearing, I'm just being so inspired. 100 years. At some point, Massy was a micro entity. At some point, Massy was a startup. Yeah, so they would have had to employ whatever methods that they would have employed to reach 100 years If we really want to do that, then we need to imitate what they are doing. We need to look at what they did, get into rooms like this, talk to these people, and follow and emulate what it is that they did to really reach this 100 years. And look, they're continuing. They're talking about their main, one of their main pillars is growth. They're always on a growth objective. You know, so even as young people, regardless of what we have met, regardless of what our parents did and all the generations before us, we could now break that mold if we really want to do the things that we say. So we need to involve the future generations. I completely agree with Terry on that, so that they can see the value of ESG to what it is that they want to achieve. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Terry, you were going to comment?
Yes, I wanted to add to this that when we're talking about future generations, we also have to think about that the world is changing and the world is becoming more innovative, technology oriented, very much digital. And we are not fully equipping young people and children for that kind of changing world. Digital connectivity is still very minimal in a lot of the territories in the Caribbean. Young children do not have access to internet. Although COVID gave us a little jump, a little push, when kids had to do exams via Zoom and learning via Teams or whatever social networks. But we are very far behind. And we have to recognize the power of digital connectivity in fostering collaboration and bridging the digital divide. And we also have to equip our young people with the tools for this, to help them navigate this changing world.
Camille, thank you very much, Terry.
Yes. Thank you, Nigel. So I wonder if, Saran, when your friends see what is happening with refugees all over the world, and we think that we may not in the Caribbean have islands to live on because of the rising sea levels and all the other issues, doesn't that make them realize that this is something that we all have to care about? You see, I think we have not been sharing the information sufficiently as Caribbean people. And I think we have to do a lot better at that. And I just think of what's happening in Jamaica now with legislation, where our Companies Act has been totally upturned, and the obligations on companies now, where each company has to have a compliance officer, the registrar of companies can come in and check your register of members, etc., etc. And that is happening because the FATF said that we are at risk for money laundering, and therefore new laws have to be put in place. And so our governments have had to put these new laws in place. So in the same way that we make changes to laws, which then our companies here have to, they have no choice but to abide by, in the same way we need to have the same sense of urgency regarding our own future that requires us now to probably put in laws across the Caribbean that can deal with some of the issues that we are faced with, recognizing that we're just a small part of the problem. And internationally, we have got to get them to do what needs to be done.
The question though is, how do we engage the children, the teenagers? How do we engage them? Shelley says we need to ensure that governance is not merely a theoretical exercise. I mean, that's very, very clear. But how do we engage these young people to really participate, to really take on the reins and begin running with those of us who are focused on making the necessary changes? That's the question.
So that's not going to be an easy challenge, but
No.
it's clearly one that we do have to take on full scale. And it means that even in conferences like these, we do have to ensure we get that mix of voices. We get the younger persons as well to be part of the conversation. And we have to build that space to allow them to feel comfortable and able to contribute before they would even listen to us. But I see Nandi has her hand up, so I will give way to Nandi for her contribution.
No, thank you so much, Kamla. I think there's a lot of value to have intergenerational because we have a way of looking at the world that is somewhat different to the younger generation, that is steeped very closely to working with their gadgets in their hands all the time. Maybe that's one way of trying to hook them into a conversation. We can try to use that platform to engage, but we also need to make a concerted effort for them to be part of this conversation, roundtable discussion. And I must say, looking in South Africa, I'm not sure if it's the same in other countries. I see the younger generation, they are fed up with us. They see the issues of climate change, human rights abuse, and all sorts of things as totally unpalatable and not to be tolerated. So they don't have the same level of patience as the older generation. And I think we need to have the energy, because if you look at history throughout the world, people that have made a real impact are young people. During the mid-50s in South Africa, our political organization, the ANC, was led by senior citizens in their 50s, but it took a young generation to move the country forward to make real changes. The 1976 riots is another example of children, sadly, that put their lives on the line to say enough of this apartheid regime that is oppressing us. So we need to have a different voice that has much more urgency, because in real fact, we are messing things up as this generation, not together, but the corporate environment is just not interested in anything. They are most of them are actually paying this service to what is required. And what I was trying to highlight in my presentation is they have a lot of rigor in how they collate information for financial performance. Why don't we use the same rigor in trying to make sure that we dot the I's and cross the T's when we're talking about reporting on ESG matters? The same meticulous way that they collate and report on financial performance. No company will go to the markets, to the investors, without dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And yet they do the bare minimum when it comes to ESG. So it's multifold. Let's try to get the younger generation who are impatient. They are certainly, I can see they are just impatient with us. They don't have the patience, because we're bequeathing to them what kind of environment are we living with them. So they are going to be cleaning up the mess of the generations before us, our generation, and we'll be gone long before we actually see where they see worse for us than what we can see right now. So time is not on our side. We need to get to the point of making sure that we don't just have conversations, but we act on the ideas that we're sharing.
Action, action. Shelley, come in, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just reiterate what everybody has said. Ms. Mandela, it's a pleasure to be part of these proceedings. Your grandfather was a hero to all of us. And on that point, I just wanted to iterate, I may be a little younger. I'm not quite a Gen Z or a millennial, but I'm on the cusp. One of the things that was said earlier was, the younger generation and technology and needing to use the tools and how COVID dragged, a lot of the young people into the need to use technology and access to IT. I'm not sure that I agree with that position. I think, I've got a niece and nephew that practically came out of the womb using, cell phones and knowing how to use a tablet, a 2-year-old can probably run circles around all of us when it comes to using technology. Young people are more and more involved in, entrepreneurship. The advent of social media is also causing a lot of young people to go have their platforms, decide on a product or decide on a service, and they're out there. As Ms. Mandela said, they are impatient. They have looked at us and seen us, the older generation, they have rejected corporatism, as a matter of fact. They're all about entrepreneurship. They're all about small business. They're all about growing their platform, growing their followers and growing their business and becoming millionaires by the time they're 25, right? These young people are also marching, they're demonstrating, they're living their values. They think that, the cows are causing the rise in emissions, they're going vegan, right? They don't wear leather. They believe in social justice and equality. They're marching for LGBTQ plus, rights. The young people are not sitting here waiting to be invited to these fora, right? And we need, if we are looking at the next generation and how we are going to work with them to save humanity. I know we've talked about this in apocalyptic terms, so I'm going to use the same sort of language. We've got to invite them. We have got to say, look, we need to hear from you because we're the ones that put you in this mess, right? What are your ideas? What are you thinking about going forward? What is important to you? We've got to invite them to the table or sit with them where they are because they're doing stuff. They just don't want to hear about, this is the development of corporate governance over the years. They don't care. They want to see what is right, what is equitable, what is fair, what is justice, and how do I translate that into the business that I'm building? How do I translate that into a sustainable business, right? That will not hurt me or the generations to come. The young people are focused. They're a lot more aware than we were, than I was growing up. So the question is, what are we doing practically that makes them believe that they can trust us to listen to what we have to say about governance, about sustainability? Because I think we could probably learn a lot more from them than they think they can learn from us. Now, I think that there's a lot that we can teach young people about good governance, how to run your business properly. If you're asking for loans and asking for investments, these are the kind of things that you should be able to show to your investors in terms of how you are governing this. It is not just dependent on one person and your ideas alone. You've got other people who maybe have experience in governance and experience in business who are mentoring you. But I do think we as leaders also probably need to engage in reverse mentorship, where we sit with these young people who probably have a lot to teach us about how to navigate this new world, and certainly the new business world, and learn from them. So that's all I have to say about that.
Can't disagree with that. Cavell, you have your hand up?
Yes, well, Shelley she captured some of what I wanted to say. And as I've shared earlier, we live in the most diverse time ever in world history in terms of the issues that we face and the diversity challenges that we now have. And we need to find ways to include all generations and maximize the benefit of having so many generations existing in the world of work at one particular point in time. We have 5 generations, and I don't think we're doing a good job of having the right culture and environment that will allow you to get the best out of the generations that we have working together in a collaborative way, where we educate, we try to get the best out of the older generation. The younger generation see us and view us in a different way. And I'm saying us because I'm smack in the middle of both sides, right? But we have not found yet the ideal way via coaching, via mentoring, via passing on the knowledge that one generation has to the other, and valuing and respecting the younger generation that is coming up by incorporating them into something like this, right? How do we incorporate the youth, the organizations driven towards youth participation and youth collaboration? How do we talk about governance and decision making, but when we look at the composition of boards and when we look at platforms for decision making, the youth often is left out of the equation a lot of the time. When we look at our education system, are we educating and preparing the future workforce for the issues and challenges that they will face in the future? Or do we stick to the traditional models that we've known and seem to be tried and tested? A comment was made earlier about the connection to our colonial ties, right? Someone spoke about that earlier. Why are we not evolving? Why our system has not evolved to educate and to develop the future workforce for the issues and challenges that we face? Why does the system mirror our colonial past so much? And the curriculum must change. We are not preparing the next generation with the skills necessary, nor the training necessary that is for the challenges that they are facing or they will face in the future. And including conversations and curriculum around this should be there as well, you know. It's left out, and you're left only as a mature person to now learn about it, as opposed to bringing it in a little bit earlier. So we are not maximizing all that we could at this point in time from the diversity that we know, the rich, diverse workforce and the generations that we have. We're not maximizing the benefit that we can actually attain from it at this point in time, and we need to find mechanisms to so do and to include young voices in it. And I wouldn't repeat anything that Shelley has said, you know, but she really did capture a lot of what I wanted to say as well. So thanks. Yeah. Thank
you. Oliver, you had your hand up earlier. Do you still have a?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is that given that our university students are the future business leaders of government, I think that's perhaps a place where we need to look to working closely with UWI as a regional institution and preparing those people for the future.
But if I may, to that point, Chair, sorry,
go ahead.
But it cannot only be UWI and the focus on those. Again, we come back to traditional degrees and not understanding that there are other education institutions that we need to prepare the workforce for other skills, you know? Yeah. So again, we go back to the traditional way of viewing skills required for the future. It is not only coming out of the University of the West Indies. So it requires a more broader view on how we view education and how we view the skills necessary for the future, and which institution is currently preparing us for that, preparing the future workforce and the skills necessary. I don't think it's just UWI alone.
Yeah,
so
no, it's a starting point, really. Yeah.
No.
Somebody mentioned ESG Youth Summit.
Right.
ESG.
Sure, I think Camille had her hand up.
Yeah, I'll come to her just now. So that whole initiative of getting into the schools, and I'm talking maybe at A levels, O levels, for those in that type of system, and getting the corporate organizations to partner. But for me, the critical thing, one of the critical things we have to do is to set up scorecards where we can measure what matters and focus on maybe 4 or 5 key indicators that will let us know whether we are making progress or falling behind. Camille?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree with everything that's being said about the young people, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what we need to do now. Because while those young persons are, you know, moving into leadership in the future, we need action now. How do we get to zero, net zero?
That's a very good question, and that's not an easy question. I really would recommend that everyone here reads Speed and Scale. He is very clear about what has to be done in each area.
Read who? Say that again.
Speed and Scale by John Doerr. D-O-E-R-R. Very frightening, I can tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So if I may add to, I think someone made the point in the chat, the importance of our behaviors matching what we want to see, because that is what the young people look at. And so I agree with Camille in that we have to look at what we could do now too, even as we try to embrace the younger generation and relate to them so that there's a coming together of minds for how we're going to move forward together. Terry, I see a point that you need to be excused now. Thank you so much. And I must say to everyone, we appreciate your patience because we did start a bit late today. So, yeah, we are a bit over time. So we'd wrap up in a bit. But if you do need to leave, Terry, I know it's late and you can be excused. So thank you so much. And we'll be in touch again. And
thank you very much. We hope to see more of you in our forum.
Oh, yes, definitely. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a pleasant weekend.
And yes, and I chose him as one of the young voices for today's panel. So Terry, I hope that was a correct call on my part.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Nandi must be tired at this hour.
Yeah, it's past midnight, I suspect.
Yes.
It's almost 1 a.m.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Monday.
On Monday. Good morning.
I do apologize for interjection, but I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I don't know what until this discussion or panel discussion has been concluded. I'm learning a lot myself. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
So
anyone else?
That there was a key point, there was a key point made about us at CCGI here possibly being the right vehicle to be able to bring regional voices together. And I'm saying that we are up for the challenge simply because so many people have voluntarily agreed to be part of Governance Week and many of our other sessions, because a lot of people recognize that working together, we can achieve so much more. And that is really where we want to go. And I want to reiterate, I do have the support of my board. So we have 3 persons right here, including our chairman, that yes, we should do all that we can, bring as many people together and let us all pool our skills, our talents, and our resources so that we can have the best impact that we can.
Sure, definitely. I'm just putting the name of the book in the chat.
Yeah, and one thing, Mr. Chairman, we haven't touched on is the fact that money has been fighting against the ESG initiatives. So the activists, like in the Shell case, you know, took them to court, and so we're back to that problem. How do we get those with power and who are benefiting from the system now through their profits to change now and do what needs to be done? And I keep getting back to legislation and the stick. And in the US, we know there's been a big pushback against companies like BlackRock, where they're saying that's not your role.
And if I may add this, Camille, I think it's important for us to use what legislation exists. So for instance, I find that not enough is known about some of these cases. So even that decision against Shell, we have raised it here at CCGI already. We had a presentation by Professor Frank Kuhneman from Curacao, who highlighted that and the implications of that. But I think we need to do more to bring persons in the energy sector to the table and discuss things like that and ensure that persons are aware that there is the move for legislation to go in that direction and therefore implications for them. But more so, it's important for us to be more proactive, to identify what are those things we can do with the resources that we have at the moment to make that turn around. And that is where I would like the discussion to be constantly focused to a great extent. What can we do? What are the actions we can take now? And clearly, AI is developing at a phenomenal pace. How can we use the AI for good rather than worry about all the bad that can happen with it? Because it will.
Yeah.
The world is like that. We've seen it forever. There's good and bad. We can't stop that. But we have an opportunity as we are beginning to understand it and as it unfolds, how can we together use our synergy, use our combined brain power and our talent to use the AI to help us achieve more in the region.
And I think Dr. Samuel has a good point. You can't legislate ethics. And for me, what is important is setting the targets and measuring progress. Without measurement, nothing happens. What gets measured gets managed. What gets managed gets done. I believe that firmly. And then we have to shine a light. So we have to publish, we have to hold corporations accountable, we have to hold organizations accountable, we have to measure, and we have to cut through all the PR and the greenwashing and focus on what is being accomplished. What have you done, and what has been the impact? How
and
has,
if we add to that, Nigel, Jamaica has gone far ahead in setting the way for that with us. So Camille, there's a lot that the PSOJ has done. And I think you guys don't always realize just how much work that is and how advanced you are to the rest of us in the region. And so let us learn from you in terms of the programs where you recognize those who are doing well. That's part of what Nigel is saying. Review what organizations are doing, measure, identify, celebrate those, highlight those who are looking to set the kinds of targets that we want to see achieved. And there's a particular program I had, Afra Raymond, forgive me, Afra killed me. Yeah, share on Jampro. I think it is Jampro. He said where there is a specific program where someone measures when projects go, they have cost overruns, you know, and there is even the measurement in terms of parliamentarians and how often they miss sittings. And so if we measure and we publish, that in itself helps to change behavior.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, measure. Avia just shared the link to the speedandscale.com tracker. That gives us a very clear scorecard that we can start using. We may not have to use all, but we can start with maybe the top 3 or something. But once we start measuring, you should see the momentum. Thank you, Avia.
Right.
Kamala, I think we have had a really good start to our circular economy conversation, but there is a lot of work to be done. And
yes,
I'm looking forward to some very interesting conversations this week.
Yes, so Cavell has her hand up. We could probably
yes, sorry, Cavell.
Yeah, and then wrap up.
Thank you so much, Kamala and Chair. And just to remind everyone, because I mean, in terms of Don's comment about legislating ethics, I just want to remind everyone of HR leaders' role in organizations. At the end of the day, we have a key role to play in the culture that we create, creating a robust and inclusive culture. HR collaborates with leadership and leadership across risk, finance, I mean, across the organization in terms of assisting with measuring against and supporting those efforts that the company has decided upon, right? So in measuring, as our chair have said repeatedly this evening, measuring is important and we could assist with that. In terms of analyzing our workforce data, to report on our organization's efforts towards recruiting and managing a global and diverse and skilled workforce with the right talent that will certainly support the kind of culture that we're trying to create. That is our role. And you can leverage this information and track and measure the metrics related to it as it relates to human capital in support of your ESG agenda. The inventory of data that we have that can help create the kind of engaged workforce that will allow you to publish the right statistics that we're talking about so stakeholders can see the value that your organization is trying to create. That is our role as well. Working with your team in measuring ESG and reporting correctly, telling the story. We tell the story as well too, ensuring that your team members embrace it and empowering your team, the organization to embrace it as well. That is our role in creating the kind of culture that will lead to the same ethical considerations and having the right workforce to support the agenda. So yes, we may not be able to legislate it, but we could certainly create the culture that will allow us to create the future that we're looking for and to support our ESG agenda. So I just wanted to conclude with that comment.
Thank you very much.
And unless those in leadership say to HR, you can do it, you can't do it. So we're back to the people at the top.
Well, one of the people at the top is the chief people officer.
Yes, but they still take direction, policy direction. So what is the policy direction of that the board is setting?
Yeah, well.
And that's why I advocate for HR on boards. I keep saying that you need an HR practitioner on boards. Kamala will hear me say that constantly.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for Nandi, first to you for a very, very comprehensive and very focused opening of the conversation this week. Thank you for taking the time to stay up past midnight. It's past 1 o'clock now. So good Monday morning, but thank you very much. And I hope you have a fantastic week. Hope you can join us for some of the conversation this week. I'd also like to thank the panelists. Terry is gone. He opened the batting very, very, very nicely with the reference to your grandfather, Cavell, Camille, and Oliver. Thank you all very much. And to the people who contributed. Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you all during the week as we go into various aspects of the circular economy and sustainable governance. Kamala, you want to wrap up?
Thank you, Nigel. I just want to ask persons, please, to stay on 5 minutes. We have a formal vote of thanks from Faye, who will wrap up as a master of ceremonies. But I do want to ask persons, I really appreciate all of the positive feedback we get here in the chat, but it's also very useful for us to be able to capture that in the survey that we have sent to you. So it's there on the chat. Christy, if it's possible, just to put that link again, because I know we've had quite a few comments since then, so persons may have missed it. So if we could get that link in the chat again, so everyone who is here present would be able to give us their formal feedback, that would be sincerely appreciated. So I just want to say thank you all. I know this has been a phenomenal start. It's going to be an extremely exciting week ahead. I look forward to everyone visiting as often as you can, engaging in the conversation, because we have a lot to talk about so that we could come to that common place for how we can move forward together. So thank you, Nigel, for taking your time to moderate the session, and of course for your wonderful leadership here with us at CCGI. And I invite Faye to come back and close off as our master of ceremonies here today.
Thank you very much, Kamala, and thank you, Nigel, as well. I think both of you have sort of together tried to, or essentially have almost done the job for me. But I do want to formally extend thanks to Nigel for his excellent moderation of the panel discussion. I think the fact that we've run over demonstrates just how important this conversation is and how engaged we all are in trying to find solutions and ways to tackle it. So we're really looking forward to an exciting week ahead. Nandi, thank you so very, very much for spending so much time with us and prompting this discussion with your excellent presentation. We are grateful, very grateful and appreciative of that. Thanks to the panelists, Terry Peterson, Cavell Joseph, Saint-Omer, Camille Facey, and Oliver Jordan for sharing with us, and all the contributors who jumped in with their comments and suggestions. We had a great panel discussion. I don't think I've ever seen such an active panel discussion, Kamla, in our sessions. We also want to thank once again our platinum sponsor, Massy, for their invaluable support in assisting us in making this event a reality, and their representative, Wendy Kerry, if she's still here, for her attendance and remarks. Our thanks go out to our gold sponsors, SustainX, our silver sponsors, First Citizens and Nancy McCall, and our bronze sponsors, Angostura and Trident Trust, who have also provided invaluable support to assist in our presentation of today's event and the coming week. Kamla, as always, we owe you a debt of gratitude for your unstinting commitment to CCGI and the passion, energy, and drive that you bring to this role. Heartfelt thanks are also extended to those who have been working behind the scenes, pulling everything together to facilitate a successful event. Christy, who helps us with our management of our Zoom facility, our graphic artist, Kyle Rampasad, and Juma Bannister and Relate Studios for our wonderful promotional video that was showcased at the beginning of today's session. And not least, you, our audience, our members, and we hope members to be. We thank you for spending your Sunday evening with us and with Nandi, his Sunday and Monday morning, sharing your views and comments. I thank you all and wish you an enjoyable evening and hope to see more of you in the coming week as we continue to explore the governance challenges and opportunities in crafting this future for circular economy for our future generations. Thank you very much and good evening.